Meet Me in the Water was born in 2024. But I want to talk about how we got there. My life was a constant trials and persecution up until the point that God showed me what I was made for. It wasn't to live for self. It was to honor and glorify Him. I was beaten down most of my life. The devil had me in chains. I was so sick, this body was riddled with diseases and sickness. But the Lord raised me out of a hospital bed for such a time as this. And in 2024, I found out what I was made for. I had a prophecy that I would be baptizing people, and I kind of laughed it off, not really thinking anything of it, until it started unfolding before my eyes. I had been teaching for about a year on social media. Just as God led me to do, I would bring daily Bible studies to you on all social media platforms. But little did I know, He had something much bigger planned for me. 2 times world champion UFC fighter Rose Namajunas. She's now my best friend, but I met her in 2023, and it changed the course of my life and hers as well. She asked me to baptize her, and at first I thought, I'm not qualified. Although I was ordained, I still felt unworthy. I still wasn't sure if this was the calling that I was supposed to answer. Rose drove 17 hours to my home in Kentucky to be baptized. And when my feet hit the water, everything changed. My whole life flashed before my eyes. I was now living for the Lord. He called me. He said, follow me. And I was following Him right into the waters of baptism. I baptized Rose, and her face shined with the glory of the Lord. And from that moment, we were both changed forever. I baptized a few others in 2023, and then I decided to let the public know. I wasn't sure how it would work out. How do you tell someone that you will publicly be standing in a body of water that they could come and be baptized if they want to? But the Lord led me to do it, and so I did. He showed me a place in North Carolina, and that's where I went. Slept in a tent, and I humbled myself knowing that I was doing the will of the Lord and not my will. When I walked in the water in North Carolina at my very first public baptism event, I had no idea what to expect. 1 person could show up, or 5, but I was certainly not prepared for what was going to happen. I baptized 54 people that day. They came down the hill in droves, and it was something like I had never seen before. I knew that the Lord was ready and preparing me for revival of the nations. After that first public event in North Carolina, I knew I had to keep going, so I went to Tennessee. And then I went south to Florida, and I did 3 baptism events in Florida, each one being unique and amazing, and a lot of people's lives being changed forever. I started to see things in the water that can't be explained. Healings, deliverance, and it just continued to grow a fire in me to do more. These training grounds were not easy. I struggled a lot. I went through so much spiritual warfare in each one to get me there, to mold me, to shape me, to train me in obedience. But no matter what came my way, I showed up. And so did the people. After Alabama, the real test came. I went to Damascus, Virginia, where I thought it was warm enough to baptize people. The weather forecast the day before and the day after was 75 degrees. But the day I went in the water, it was 45. And the water temperature matched the outdoor temperature, bitter cold, the coldest I'd ever felt in my life. You know, the previous 5 events had been anywhere between 20, 30, and 40 people. But I had no idea what was in store for me in that water. 74 people came to be baptized in a cold mountain creek. I didn't have waders yet. I was in a tiny wetsuit, and I was cold to my bones. The coldest I'd ever felt in my whole life. It took 3 days for me to feel my toes again, but I learned in those waters of how to die to self. I learned what it meant to be in the spirit and not in the flesh. Because if I was in my flesh, I would have got out of that water. I would have been too cold to stand. But I was ignoring all the pains that were screaming at me so that I could be the vessel for the Lord in that water that day. And He sustained me. Damascus, Virginia was my ultimate test for faithfulness and obedience to Jesus Christ. Could I do this? Would I do this? And I did. Another baptism event right after Damascus, Virginia. I had less than a week to prepare for it. My toes I couldn't feel. They were all different colors. They were white at the tips. And my body was recovering from the impact of that day. And I wondered if I could do this. Even though I just passed this great test, could I do this? Should I do this? Doubts and fears creeped in as I had only a few days to recover from that physical impact of that day in Virginia. Nevertheless, I prayed through it. I gathered my strength in the Lord, and I showed up to South Carolina. In South Carolina, I baptized 136 people. As I went home from there, I struggled with the fight to give up. Was my faith strong enough? Could I do this? And so as soon as I got home, I took to my porch and I paced and I prayed and I paced and I prayed. And I said, Lord, I'm willing. I've shown you my obedience to you. I will break this flesh and I will do your will. But I need some help. I prayed for help. I said, Lord, I can do it, and I will do it. As long as you put this on my shoulders, I will carry this. But your burden is easy and your yoke is light. So I'm giving this burden to you. And just as he does, ask and ye shall receive. The very next event was in Lej, Georgia. And when I showed up, people from the Damascus, Virginia event showed up to help. They were there. They listened to the call, just as I did. That is where my team formed. Helena and Michael, they were baptized in Virginia, and as they walked away from me, the Lord loudly said, "Help her." But she drove 10 hours to the next event, and she was there in Georgia to help me, as was Kaylee and her husband Michael and Kareem. A lot of the people that I baptized from past events started showing up. Now I have a team. Now I had help. And now the numbers were growing. So I knew baptism events were a thing of the past, and revival was the thing of the future. God had given me a vision of revival, and I was trying so hard to find it. I looked all over the world for this big white tent and all the things in my visions, and I couldn't find it. But then the Lord made it happen, and it was me that was supposed to start this revival. Our very first revival was in Kentucky, and it was wild. We had thousands of people show up. Almost 400 people were baptized. This was the first time we had Pastor Elwood preaching. We had the World Prayer Center worship team. But I had someone sent that was already trained. His name was Bevan, and he helped assist. Everybody on that land was changed that day, and we were just getting started. From Kentucky, we moved on to Ohio, and I thought spiritual warfare was behind me, but I was wrong. In Ohio, we had the most heavy spiritual warfare upon our entire team, even myself. I didn't think I could do it. About halfway through in Ohio, I was in the bathroom praying to God for strength, for this to pass, for the sickness to come off of me in the name of Jesus. I was walking back to the crowd from the bathroom, and a man collapsed. At the same time that I was struggling so desperately to find a way back to the Spirit, I ran to him and I poured prayer, no longer thinking of my flesh, but of him. That man was healed. I spoke to his mother not long ago. His kidneys were failing. He come to that water in desperation. But if he only knew that 10 minutes before that, I was in desperation. Just like the other times I passed the test, I fought through. Everything that my flesh felt took a back seat, and I worked in the Spirit the rest of the entire evening. It started to storm, not just in the spiritual as it was, but in the physical. And then, right at the end, a rainbow. Not just any rainbow. A rainbow that started in the very waters where we were baptizing. Some of you might know the whippoorwill story. I was unsure where to go after Ohio. And the Lord was pressing on me that I had to go somewhere. I just couldn't find the location. And so for 2 weeks, I had a whippoorwill outside my window. Every night it would just be as loud as it could. I was so confused at why a whippoorwill was outside of my window during the night, every night. And one day, I took my phone on the porch and I said, all right, I will record a story. Lord, why ever this whippoorwill is here, show me. And I prayed. And I tried to do a lesson, but I was struggling through it. Towards the end of the lesson, I just cut it off. The very next morning, I found my next location. I went on the porch that night and I finished my lesson and the whippoorwill left. That's God. That's one of many signs that I've had as God leads me to the next location. After Missouri, we were faced with a personal trial when my husband lost his job. It was something I had actually prayed for. I know that sounds harsh, but I had prayed for a way out for him so that he could focus only on doing these videos that are brought to you, that inspire so many to come to the waters. When you take a leap of faith, the Lord provides. He comes through. He had something bigger planned for us. And from there, we took a big trip out to Colorado, where Rose lives. Colorado changed a lot for me. It was the first trip that I had joy. And I know that sounds harsh. Of course, I have so much joy seeing all of these people be freed. But as far as spiritual warfare went, I had been through it at all the revivals to get me there. So much spiritual warfare. But Colorado changed things for me. I got to spend some time with my best friend. She poured into me as I poured into her. And then we had a revival in Colorado. And for whatever reasons the Lord had, that one needed to be smaller. This was the first revival that Rose was able to serve at. She was right alongside me the whole day as we baptized 76 people. Although the big ones are grand, this one was special. And then we came home to Kentucky, where the next revival was planned. God put it on my heart that it was the end of the one-day revivals, that we needed 2 days. I knew that meant for an increase, and I was ready for it. So in Kentucky, we didn't keep an accurate count, but we know we baptized at least 300 people. After Carlisle, Kentucky, we were headed to North Carolina. We had that one planned for quite a while to be the 1-year anniversary of the very first baptism event that I ever did. But Hurricane Helene hit, and it hit hard. It devastated a lot of North Carolina and surrounding states. Roads were closed, washed completely away. Towns were shut down, and the people of the Appalachian Mountains were suffering. We contemplated canceling. That would be the thing that most of the world would do. They would cancel. They would say, we can't do this anymore. Despite that destruction, we were able to make it down. It took twice as long, but we didn't care. We made it to North Carolina, and when we did, God moved. North Carolina was heavy. Then we were headed to Texas. I knew Texas would be big, as everything in Texas is. The Lord had me show up to that location early. I had to pray. I paced those grounds and that pier, and I prayed. There was an 80% chance of rain. There was a storm blowing in, and it was not going to be pretty. We just left a place that storms devastated. And so I went to prayer more fiercely and powerfully than I had at any other location. I prayed over the water. I prayed over the land. I prayed over the people. God had prepared the hearts of so many people to come to Texas and be baptized. The rain held off. The wind blew a little bit, and the waves were a little rough. But we made it through. The first day we stayed in the water 15 hours baptizing. This was my first location that we were able to form lots of pods of people baptizing. Some of the people that I had trained and discipled for so long stepped into their calling and their purpose. In 2 days, we baptized over 900 people in Texas. One of those smaller baptism events that I did a year prior, God had planned for someone there to offer me their land to host revival, and that was in Florida. Not far from where she was baptized, Jeanette contacted me and she wanted to host a revival on her land. We came to Florida, my crew being bigger than ever, all of us being trained up for that moment. This was the second event that Rose was going to attend and assist in the water. As we all showed up and prepared, we knew it was going to be big. The land was so breathtakingly beautiful. It's what I picture the Garden of Eden to have looked like. There was a giant tree in the middle. It looked like the tree of life. And a lot of people gained a new life that day in Florida. Just as the Lord had given me the prophecy that I would baptize nations, we had people from 5 different countries show up in Florida to be baptized. We had people from Canada, Sweden, the Netherlands, Poland, and all over to come in and be baptized. We baptized 845 people that day to end 2024 in a beautiful display of what God is bringing to the world. Revival. It is here, and it's just getting started. Our 2025 year is being planned out rapidly as we continue to try to make our way to states all across the nation to bring old-timey revivals and biblical baptisms to people all across the nation. We are ready. We have been prepared. Meet me in the water.